This creepy mystery takes place in Enfield, North London, which unfolded in 1977. The Hodgson family, Peggy and her 4 children, experienced a scary series of unexplained events that captured everyone's attention. Peggy was a single mother of her 4 children and lived in a council house at 284 Green Street in Enfield, North London. On one August evening, Janet Hodgson, age 11, and her brother Johnny, age 10, had reported that their bed was shaking. This doesn't seem too bad, but over the next few weeks, things started to intensify, taking a darker turn. Janet and her siblings started hearing strange noises, such as scratching and banging at the walls. They all brushed it off at first, but it continued. Furniture started to move by itself. Household objects were thrown across the room. But the most disturbing thing was when Janet appeared to be levitating in front of neighbors and police officers. Things then took a sinister turn. Janet's mother, Peggy, and investigators Guy, Lyon Playfair, and Maurice Gross had claimed they saw Janet levitate not just once, but multiple times. This happened both during the day and at night, and would happen when Janet was alone. Guy Lyon Playfair and Maurice Gross play an important role at investigating this case. They spent hours at the house with the family and witnessed multiple occurrences of paranormal activity. The reports of Janet's levitation started shortly after the first disturbances began. It was said that Janet had floated several feet above her bed and remained floating. Guy Lyon Playfair and Maurice Gross had captured some photos of Janet midair. However, some people pointed out that Janet looked like she was jumping rather than levitating. Still, several witnesses claimed they saw Janet rise into the air, adding to the creepiness of this case. It wasn't just investigators and her mother who witnessed strange things. Their neighbors, police officers, and journalists had visited their house. Their neighbors, Peggy Nottingham, and her husband had offered support to the family and had witnessed furniture moving on its own. They also heard the strange noises and unexplainable banging coming from the house. Graham Morris, a journalist for the Daily Mirror, had visited the house, and they had witnessed unusual activities. They witnessed objects flying across the room and Janet's levitation. Graham had managed to capture photographs which shows Janet levitating. Finally, police officers had been called to the house to investigate the situation. Police officer Carolyn Heaps reported that she saw a chair move across the floor. In her report, she could not explain what had caused the chair to move and believed it was paranormal activity. Another horrifying occurrence of this case is when Janet's voice appeared to transfer into the voice of Bill Wilkins. Bill Wilkins, a deceased man, had reportedly lived in the house years before. The voice had identified itself, and Bill Wilkins, and the creepiest part, is when it went through his life and death in the house. A fact that Janet would not be able to know is that the voice said he had a fatal hemorrhage in the living room. The investigators had recorded Janet's voice, and it was not her usual voice. It was deep, hoarse, and disturbingly low. What made the voice the most scariest is that it would continue even when Janet was drinking or kept her mouth shut. Janet later admitted she faked some of the disturbances, but the most creepy events did actually happen. The case did have lots of skepticism and debates over the years. This started when Janet admitted faking some of the disturbances, such as moving objects and some levitating. Also, with the photographic evidence, some believed Janet was jumping in the photos. This made people think it was a hoax and wasn't real. The Enfield Poltergeist remains one of the most creepy, talked about cases in the paranormal history. This case partially inspired the 2016 horror movie, The Conjuring 2. The Enfield Poltergeist is not fully explained, and the mystery surrounding the case continues, and it may never be fully understood. On a cold December night in 1945, a family's Christmas celebration turned into a nightmare that would forever remain unresolved. This is the disappearance of the Sodder children. On Christmas Eve of 1945, Jenny and George Sodder were celebrating the holiday in their home, along with their 10 children. The family had spent the evening having fun after they had their Christmas dinner. Unfortunately, at 1 a.m., a fire broke out in their house. Within all this chaos, Jenny, George, and 5 of their surviving children, between the ages of 9 and 2, managed to escape the horrifying fire. Things became even worse because, unfortunately, the other 5 of their children, Maurice, age 14, Martha, age 12, Louis, age 9, Jenny, aged 8, and Betty, aged 5, were missing. The Fayetteville Fire Department arrived quickly to the horrifying scene. Unfortunately, despite their quick arrival, the house was in flames. The house was consumed by the fire, and there was only little that the firefighters could save. The fire department found no remains of the 5 children and said they had perished in the fire. They also stated that the fire was likely caused by a faulty wire or electrical short. Jenny and George became skeptical with this explanation. The fact that there was no bone fragments or any physical evidence from the children, with this and the cause of the fire, it left the family questioning a lot of things and if it was deliberate. They had several factors which raised their doubts about how the fire started and the fate of their 5 children. George Sodder had reported having strange, unsettling phone calls days before the fire. He also had a strange visit from a man who had taken an unusual interest in the family's home. Jenny Sodder had also received a strange phone call. The caller spoke in a threatening manner and warned her to keep her children away from the home. Jenny did not take this call seriously at the time. What makes things creepier is that the Sodders had received another strange phone call around midnight, not long before the fire engulfed their home. Unfortunately, the caller was never identified. Witnesses had some unsettling details before the fire broke out. The Sodders' neighbors had reported seeing strange behavior. Several had claimed they saw a car parked outside their house around the same time the fire started. What makes things weirder is that the car was described as an unmarked military car, which is unusual for the area they lived in. Some of the neighbors had reported the same car was driving slowly around the neighborhood on previous nights. Although some witnesses saw the car parked near the house on the night of the fire, others reported it speeding away right before the fire started. The Sodder family did all they could to find their 5 missing children. They followed every lead they could find. The case took an extreme turn in 1949, several years after the incident. Jenny and George had received an anonymous photo in the post. It was postmarked from Rome, Italy. The photo shows a group of children standing next to a man. The children in the photograph had a strong resemblance to their missing children. The most disturbing parts of the photo was the man's expression, and that the children did not appear to be in a family environment. Jenny believed that the children in the photo were her own, and that this photo added to her suspicion that her children had been kidnapped. The fact that the photograph was taken in Italy added to the unsettling feeling of this case. It also made the Sodders consider that their children had been taken abroad. The Sodders decided to hire a private investigator to look into the photograph and trace the actual location of it. Unfortunately, despite all this effort looking into the photograph, the investigation had no true evidence. The photo was a haunting piece of evidence that also backed up theories of the children's fate. As the investigation continued, it revealed more clues. A local report had suggested that the fire may not have been an accident and that it was intentional. Despite all the leads and follow-ups, there was no physical evidence to support these theories, and the fate of Maurice, Martha, Louise, Jenny, and Betty remains unknown. The disappearance of the Sodder children remains one of America's most chilling unsolved mystery. It haunts the family and public, leaving them with many questions unanswered. On a bitterly cold evening in February 1959, 9 hikers started their journey into the Ural Mountains. They were unaware that they were hiking into a nightmare that would remain unsolved forever. This is the mystery of the Dyatlov Pass incident. On January 27, 1959, 9 hikers headed out on a challenging journey through the Ural Mountains in Soviet Russia. 23-year-old Igor Dyatlov led the group. The hikers were a group of adventurers and students of the Ural Polytechnic Institute. Despite all of their preparation and experience, nothing could prepare them for what they were walking into. On February 1st, the group set up their camp on the eastern slopes of Kolatsyakal, which was a mountain named Dead Mountain. The night grew darker and the temperatures dropped. Then something happened that terrified the group. Even with the freezing, harsh weather, something was so disturbing that they tore their way out of their tents in fear. On February 20th, a search party was sent out from the police as there was no word from the hikers, and what they found was chilling. They had found the hiker's tent on February 26th. It was half collapsed and covered in snow. The hikers were so scared and desperate to escape, they had slashed their way out of the tent. The search party also found footsteps which led to a nearby woods, and some of their belongings, such as warm clothing. Not far from the tent, 2 of the hikers' bodies were found. Yuri Krivonishenko and Yuri Doroshenko. They had little clothing on and both shoeless. 3 more bodies were found between the camp and woods. Dyatlov was one of them. It took 2 more months to find the remaining 4 hikers. When they were found, they were buried in feet of snow in a ravine far in the woods. What raised the most questions was the condition they were found in. Some of them had severe injuries, such as a fractured skull and major chest fractures. Investigators described the injuries similar to being in a car crash. What made things the most eerie is that they had no injuries externally. This then made it hard to understand what caused these injuries. Lyudmila Dubinina, who was one of the hikers, was found without her tongue, and 2 others were found without their eyes. What could have caused this? Despite all the intense investigations, the authorities could only determine that the group of hikers had died due to an unknown force. This suggests that whatever caused their deaths was intense and made them act in ways that was extreme and life-threatening. This explanation added to the mystery of the case. It also powered numerous theories about what happened on the mountain. Just like all mysteries, many theories were created trying to find answers as to what happened. One theory suggests that it was an avalanche and that it caused the hikers to panic and flee from their tent. The fear of being buried from the avalanche could have been the reason they had little clothing. However, there isn't much evidence to support this theory, as there was no evidence of an avalanche. There was no debris or snow. Was it something more eerie? Another theory suggests military testing. The area around Dyatlov Pass was known for military activity, so maybe the hikers may have stumbled across secret military tests and were accidentally caught in it. The unusual injuries and reports of glowing orbs in the sky may back this theory. Finally, another theory suggests animal attack. The hikers may have encountered a bear or a wolf, causing them to flee from their tents in a hurry. However, despite this theory, there is not much evidence to back it. There was no sign of animals, and the injuries seem more intense than an animal attack. What do you think? Do you believe any of these theories? All of the theories have their strengths and weaknesses, but despite all the investigations, the exact cause of the Dyatlov Pass incident remains one of the most unsolved, disturbing mysteries in history. On a quiet evening in May 2008, a young man's routine drive takes an unsettling turn, which leads to a creepy mystery that remains unsolved. This is the disappearance of Brandon Swanson. On May 14, 2008, Brandon Swanson, aged 19, was driving home from a friend's house in Marshall, Minnesota. He was driving through rural roads, and around 2 a.m. things took a turn for the worse. Brandon's car got stuck in a ditch. A combination of factors could have led to his car getting stuck. The road he was driving on was a gravel road, which can be difficult to drive on. Another reason was that he was driving in the dark. Trying to navigate rural roads can be challenging, especially at night. After his accident, around 2:30 a.m., he rang his parents for help. He told them he had gotten his car stuck and was uncertain of his location. He described his location and said he was near a rural area south of Lynn, Minnesota. But as they approached the area, they couldn't find him. Brandon appeared to be calm on the phone. He reassured his parents and said he would walk towards the nearby town with lights. The call continued, and his father tried reassuring him. During this conversation, something unsettling happened. Brandon said he could see lights in this distance, but then panic struck. His voice sounded fearful. He could be heard screaming, meaning he was distressed. The abrupt mood change adds to the creepiness of the call. The call then ended randomly. His parents tried numerous times calling his number, but there was no answer. The last cell ping showed that he was somewhere near the town of Lind. His exact location remained unknown. The police arrived and found his car still in the ditch, but there was no sign of Brandon anywhere. What made the call more alarming is that Brandon was calm at the start. His sudden distress and panic left investigators concerned about his well-being and left them questioning what happened after the call ended. As the investigation unfolded, a large-scale search happened in the area where his phone last pinged. However, there was no trace of him. Many theories formed about what happened. One theory suggests that after he got out of his car, he was abducted, causing the sudden panic on the phone. Another theory suggests that he may have suffered an accident after leaving his car. Due to the unfamiliar rural area, he could have fell into a ditch or became injured and unable to call for help. Despite all the searches, there was no remains or evidence of an accident. The rural location, weird phone call, and darkness at night made this investigation difficult. But with all the investigating and searching, the case still remains unsolved.